Welcome. Welcome, everybody. We're gonna take about 1 to 2 minutes as people stream in. And we look forward to being in conversation. So how are you feeling, Mark?
Ready? I think we've been preparing for this for quite some time, right?
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So let's give this another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll get started.
Sure. I believe it's also on YouTube, right? I think Joanne was saying.
Exactly. This is where we wish, well, at least I wish I had some good jokes. Do you have any, Mark?
Been a bit short on the stock jokes lately.
Okay, so let us get started. You ready, Mark?
I'm ready.
Okay. So thank you everyone for spending a part of your weekend with us. A warm welcome to the 5th conversation of Meet the Graduates, a student-led initiative where EDBA graduates of École de Ponts Business School, one of France's most prestigious grand écoles, are being interviewed by their fellow EDBA course mates. Now, for clarity's sake, EDBA stands for Executive Doctorate in Business Administration, and as distinct from a PhD, an EDBA is a practice-based doctoral degree where practitioners marry frontline business experience with the academic rigor of research. And as practitioner scholars, graduates of the EDBA program is expected to contribute new knowledge that advances their field of practice. And today, I'm very happy to be in conversation with Dr. Mark Esposito, for whom the EDBA is his 2nd terminal degree. Now, the first of which is from Harvard Business School. Now, given Dr. Esposito's list of accomplishments is quite long and illustrious, I am tasked with the difficult challenge of choosing what to exclude. So if I may exercise the liberty of being the host, perhaps let me share what intrigues me the most about you, Mark. First, as an academic, you have an enviable career where you seem to have reached an apex, not only having taught in leading institutions such as Harvard International Business School, Harvard University, the University of Cambridge, Arizona State University's Thunderbird, and IE Business School, but you have also been considered by Thinkers 50 in 2016 as one of the 30 most prominent rising business thinkers in the world. As an entrepreneur, you co-founded Nexus Frontier Tech, an AI scale-out venture, which I believe is en route to IPO, right?
That's right.
And lastly, as your regular guy next door, you also so happen to hold the rank of Master Instructor, Black Belt 4 done at the International Budo Institute in Canada. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you so much, Roslina. I feel always a bit taken away, right? I'm fundamentally, as you know, shy. So when I'm hearing the introduction, I like to turn my head around and say, who is he? But yeah, it's kind of the journey I had. Nice to see you today.
Yeah. So Mark and I will be chatting for about 30 to 50 minutes, and then we'll be opening up the Q&A for 10 to 15 minutes. So please keep in mind that this is a recording. So if you have any questions, I will encourage you to either put it into the chat box or to raise your hand and to answer in person. So Mark, if I may begin.
Please.
By the time you were part of the École de Ponts EDBA program, you are already an academic with numerous publications and books under your belt. So I'm curious why you chose to research social innovation and the rise of pluralistic societies for your EDBA.
Well, Aruna, thanks for starting this off. I'm happy there's a bit of a memory lane conversation as well, as even if it's not too long ago, but time is felt different these days, right? We do much more within the hours of the day. When I started the EDBA, I was in search of the next level of the way for me to apply my foundations to something more applied in the practice. And the folks at the École de Ponts, many of them are friends that I have for a long time. So there was a field that I could trust, a group of people I like working with. And when the program was launched, I said, what a great opportunity to use a degree to force me to do research by addressing problems of practice. And that's how it all started. Social innovation was not necessarily defined as such in my radar back in the days. I've been writing a lot about the challenge with sustainability. I'm not a sustainability scholar per se, but I've been writing enough for me to feel that I can navigate through the literature, right, and maybe contribute. But I wanted to go deeper in this conversation around the major rise of an engagement that we have in society in trying to address some of the most pressing challenges. And as economists by training, you think that governments might be able to address that, or you might think that free markets might be able to do that. And the answer is much more complex than this. You want to understand, how do we engage? And that's the concept of pluralistic society, multiple stakeholders in addressing our challenges. And that's where they all started. That's the trigger, fundamentally.
Okay. I imagine that there are some people in this conversation who may not have a nuanced or as nuanced an understanding of some of the terms that you've used, even though we think we understand it. So could you help us break down, maybe in 2-3 sentences, what is social innovation for you, and what is a pluralistic society?
So, Roslina, when we generate value that has more than one dimension to be measured, and that value is important for economic drivers, social drivers, environmental drivers, and geopolitical drivers, whatever drivers we're looking at, or you can call them determinants if we move in the conversation into what we can measure. That is a pluralistic model. For me, the ability to understand how we, from a pluralistic perspective, address challenges is a form of innovation. So the first level of the definition is that what is innovative is how we work around these problems and who is invited to address it. So there's innovation in the participation of the stakeholders to the challenge we're facing. So if before it was the government, the private sector, now it's more people, more stakeholders. That's the first level of innovation. The second level of social innovation is finding important needs and try to address them with a business model. And that's how, Michael Porter, who was my mentor at Harvard, used to call it the shared value. So a large part of my literature and my papers when I was doing social innovation is about the creation of shared value. Because fundamentally, if you are removing the trade-off between economic and social drivers, you are creating a construct that is basically co-creating value at the same time, no matter whether it's an economic value or social value. And so social innovation inspires itself by addressing important needs that are emerging from social constructs rather than just pure economic incentives. And it's a slightly different starting point from how some organizations decide to create value, but we put it in perspective of not only organizations, equally stakeholders. So stakeholders, participation, and innovation from social phenomenon. It's really the combination that creates social innovation for me.
Okay. So given it's been about 3+ years since you graduated, and you have such a richness of research already behind you, how has what you thought about why it matters to research this topic evolved between the time you graduated to now?
I think that within the idea of pluralistic society that we should attribute to Henry Mintzberg, which is a major scholar in the literature, we didn't have the participation from the financial players in these stories. Often the financial players seem to look at social innovation with the skepticism of this is a lot of cost affiliated to any form of innovation. Can we afford it? Should we be more cost efficient? The conversation was more about whether or not we could afford innovation.
Mm.
Today, we're learning that many of the financial players are rapidly moving into the arena, and they are co-creating the dialogue for us to see some of this challenge addressed, because they're moving their interest in better companies, in better governments, in better NGOs. So finance players, investors, venture capitalists, banks, grants, they're all now converging to appreciate social phenomenon as a legitimate form of creation of value, when before there was always a field that there was more of a I think a trade-off. And I think this is, from the time I graduated to now, the major difference in the perception of who is part of this. The financial players today are participating to the creation of social ventures much more than before.
Mm. I'm not sure if this is too early for a million-dollar question, but you spoke about pluralistic societies. You spoke about the fact that the number of participants at the table to co-create value, if I could just synthesize it that way. I'm curious, beyond the financial players, who have you observed have actually been more present at the table?
Governments, for sure. Government used to be much more laissez-faire. They would let the private sector do. Today, governments are much more in the conversations. They push, they incentivize, they prioritize, they make opportunities available, they do fiscal discounts, but they equally certify. So we've been noticing the government tends to appreciate forms of accreditation of value that is now becoming more. I will give an example, Roslina, that is within our institution. So with another graduate, which is George Demetrio, who was a friend for many years, and we graduated a few months apart. George and I date back to 2011 when George was in my class at Harvard. So it tells you that we grew a decade together. George ran the Circular Economy Center at École. That was a center that started as almost like a startup, and over time it became more important, mainly funded by a lot of government grants. And now we're trying to go into the Circular Economy Alliance, which is an initiative to try to certify organization in what they do. That is all in large part due to government's focus shifting to this kind of initiatives. This is huge. Back in the days, government was not interventionist at all about this. Today, government actively steer the interest in a certain direction, and especially in the EU.
So apart from the government and the financial players, from your experience, do you believe there are voices that are still missing from the table that needs to be there?
I think there is a geographical conversation to be made. There are many emerging economies. They're still charmed by the narrative of the industrial story, that you do more to get more, that the environment is secondary to our interest, that human capital can be easily disposed as interchangeable. So I think it's a matter of maturity of the conversation, Roslina, in where we see this applied or not. And I think emerging economies, they are in a position to suffer from a legacy that came from the past, but not necessarily, and therefore it becomes for them their modus operandi, but they don't have yet the resources to move towards what we see as the emerging trends. So I think they're a little bit in transition. And then you have more the paradoxical examples, like a country like the US, where the conversation like we're having was never mature enough to really permeate. So there is school of thoughts where this conversation that we're having are very well advanced, but there are other parts of the country where we still see them struggling with the whole acceptance that value is not, narrowly speaking, just economics.
So you speak quite fluidly and fluently on the topic. So it seems that it's something that you've been thinking about, maybe at the back of your mind or at the fore of your consciousness. So I'm wondering, what is it in either your professional and or your personal life motivated you to commit a big chunk of your being researching this topic?
To me, this is it's an accelerator like this topic is building ripple effects very fast. The moment you're creating value in a more pluralistic form, value spreads much faster. So I see this actually as a leverage point. You know, I have to pick up only selective battles because I have limited resources, limited time on earth, and I have to be strategic in my approach. These are, I think, pain points that if I can tap with the right conversation, engage in the people that I happen to meet or that happen to follow my work. There are two kinds of followership, right? One is the one that I happen to meet, and therefore they get close to the nature of the work. The other one is the academic research, where it's read by people who don't know me personally, but they simply have to assess the, I would say, the reliability of the work. So there are two forms of engagement that happen with some form of asymmetry, right? One of the people I meet, they become my network, and one of the people who read my work that are, you know, mainly academics, I don't know. I think that this is a topic that can brighten their hearts and move them forward and get them to understand that we are in an intersection that is happening to redefine our institutional frameworks, to tell us, well, the 20th century was about industrial value. We did it through the more for more paradigm. In the 21st century, we have to rethink our generation, our concept of value. It's no longer about more for more. There is more sides to the same story. Can we get more people part of this so that we can grow our economies, I think, in an equitable form? So that's why I dedicated a large part of my time to this. It's a leverage. And I think it's moving faster now than in any point in time in my career. And it's exciting to see more people engage in conversation like this, more initiatives. So I think it's reassuring that some input is being created. You never know whether it'll be enough for the kind of challenge that we're facing, but who does know, right? So that's a different story.
So aside from the leverage point, which is something you mentioned, does it also sound like there is a motivation for a more equitable future?
Yes, Roslina. I think COVID has demonstrated to us that our systems are holding relatively well. You know, if you're looking at a massive shock like COVID, we're kind of resilient enough as a society to bounce back. But where we have not really bounced back, but we have increased the gap is in the inclusion, is in the social justice, is in the opportunities and the inequalities. We're more unevenly distributed today than in any point in modern history. And you know, as you know from our preparations, I'm currently in the production of 2 new books. One for me is the most important work. Then maybe we'll talk. But one of the things we learn is we are more connected than ever, but we are divergent. We're not convergent. And that's a challenge that I see that we need to address. And this divergence is built in inequality. So when we're talking about equity, we're talking about social equity, equity of opportunities, bypassing lottery of birth. There's so many of these conversations. And we have to do something about this because it's where society demonstrates its most ultimate ambition is to really advance, you know, civilizations. To tell and to finish on a statement, one of the things I learned from the colleagues at Arizona State was the idea that if we measure ourselves by who we include rather than who we exclude is a better measurement. And I think this is now becoming also one of my working principles.
So with working principles as a segue to the next question, if it makes sense at all, was there anything for you that you believe could not have been discovered, could not have been known, could not have been realized by you had it not been for the EDBA journey?
You know, that's a great question, Roslina. The EDBA was a catalyst for me. It took me from one stage of my life to the other one. And you ask yourself, was that incrementally possible even without EDBA, considering I was already had a doctorate, I was already teaching. As you know, I became a full professor with tenure in April 2015, months before starting the EDBA. So for an academic, that's kind of, I'm kind of okay now, right? You can worry about different kind of problems. But I was so much in search of that transformation, that form of acceleration towards a different side of myself. And you can do this when you're meeting people who inspire you, when you find yourself challenged, so that you start feeling that you are building some form of complacency, and what seems to be a boundary that enables you becomes a boundary that disables you or inhibits you. And the EDBA was for me the leap towards the newer me in many ways. So I owe to the program much more than the doctoral title, because it didn't change much. When they call me doctor at the end of my viva, they didn't really feel special, because it's been an old story for quite some time by then. So it was not the title itself. It was what this process allowed me to think and who it allowed me to become. And I have a huge debt of gratitude towards the program, not because of any form of propagandistic approach about good program, bad program, good faculty, all of the stuff. It's like is ornamental for me. It's much more about how much the reflection pushed me to really face important questions in my mind that were addressed fundamentally through research. And it also rewired me to a core tenets, which is no matter what happens in my life, where I'm advancing, my client facing, my government advising, my teaching, and my writing, I am in the core, I am a researcher. And that's something that the program reminded me in, I would say, unequivocal way.
So if I could invite from you kind of a stream of consciousness exposition, what does it mean for you to be a researcher? How does that link out to this calling that you seem to have to contribute to a more equitable future? For example, one of the things I really love about this EDBA program, as distinct from anything that I currently know, is the fact that in the very beginning, they really ask you to bring you to the topic. They challenge you with, why does it matter to you what you do in this program? And that, as a starting point, I felt was very, not to use the word unique in a laissez-faire way, but it was a very vulnerable challenge, which not everybody took up. So I'm curious
about the challenge itself in terms of the DBA as a journey, or
what does it crystallize for you in terms of you arriving at this point of certitude? I am a researcher. And how does that link out to this desire of
to the
yours?
desire? I understand now. Roslina, I am in pursuit of truth, right? That's kind of where I think my purpose as a researcher has to go. And you can argue what is truth, and you can say, are truth entirely one-sided? Are they multi-sided? Is there one ultimate truth? I don't know, but I think there is a process that investigates questions. And when I don't know, I try to start the process of inquiry. And that process is about asking myself those questions that likely will be researched, so to say. And it doesn't stop. You think this happens when you are in the early stage of your doctoral, because they tell you got to have a research question, what's your hypothesis, or your literature review, and you find yourself dealing with a language which is absolutely strange to everyday's life. You kind of find yourself, okay, what is this? But once you sort of like go past the technical side, it's just when you're learning the code of reference in a given system, right? So it's nothing more than that. You know that that is a way of thinking. You start finding yourself facing important questions every day. And some of these questions, they become the object of your research. And if you just try to take it from a slightly different perspective, one of the things I don't worry about, which is different from people who are working in the corporate world, is whether I'll ever have new questions popping up, or whether will I ever feel less relevant in my process. No, I think my entire life will be about being a researcher throughout the stages of my life, in which I guess what will change is my interpretation of things and the significance it has. But do I worry that in the older version of Mark, there will not be a query that will suddenly inspire me to think as a researcher? I think the certitude that I am expressing come from the fact that I think for once in a career where you're always asking question, not knowing if you ever have answer, I had one definite answer that I'm keeping close to my heart, which is I am a researcher. I'll constantly address reality by asking questions and trying to create a methods of work around that. That applies to everything, Roslina.
So given that you are tenured by the time you started the EDBA, was there anything that you found specifically challenging about the journey?
Yeah, I was presumptively believing that because I already have a PhD, I will do this in a wink of an eye, and I was very wrong. So I sinned of overconfidence. I thought, everybody was struggling figuring this out. So like, I've been doing this for long enough, I can figure this out. And still, my papers were reviewed. They were pushed back. They wanted me to improve things. It took me time, considering that I was in a privileged position, that I didn't have to worry about knowing what's the difference between the kind of researches, how to get the literature, how to cite. I had a vintage point. I remember during the labs, they were asking us to come up with something in writing in half an hour. And of course I nailed it down. I wrote 1,500 words, right? Because that's easy. And I think this is like, being invited to the easiest, congregation ever. But once you start working in your real papers with your real supervisor, when you really have to be assessed by the quality of what you have, there's no discounts, right? So I found myself working hard for this. I might have told you, but each paper took me a significant chunk of time, 6 to 8 months at least. And again, I come from a perspective that writing for me does not intimidate me. Neither I have to wonder, am I good or not? I am good at writing, but that doesn't mean that I can write this and get it through and have it published, right? So that was a big lesson for me. And listen, if I started a third doctoral now, it won't be any different.
So, oh my gosh, are you even thinking of a
no, forget about it. No, I mean, I don't think there is any stamina left in me for that journey. So I really ran out of it. But I'm trying to say, what? You never stop learning. You never stop improving. You never stop receiving feedback. That was a challenge. And challenge of senses, it was great. It was in hindsight, it was great. In the moment, it sucked, of course, right? I was frustrated, but it's the process of learning.
Yeah. But talking about in the moment, the flip side of the question, was it something that you enjoyed, which you didn't expect to enjoy?
Having a cohort was great. Having a WhatsApp group with my cohort and getting updates about what everybody was doing was great, because in that cohort, I was a student like everyone else. While in my professional life, I was a professor and I was teaching, and students do the assignments and I write. But I'm not invited in students' WhatsApp groups, right? I usually, they are very careful to make sure I'm not part of that. But now it was like, what did the professor want? Did you know about this? When is the due date? It's like, cool, I like it. It was really nice the communal side, the community spirit, the building of a cohort. There was also, in my case, as you know, we were the first cohort, EDBA 1, starting a new journey, right? It was incredible to simply go back and have that feel about, yeah, this is my batch, and the brain trust, and nobody wanted to brain trust me for some reason, right? I was not reliable enough. People thought that I would be, I don't know, not playing at the same level. So I felt feeling a bit cut out. But I love the whole experience. And I have to say, and I know it sounds like a bit presumptuous, but I felt I graduated too soon, to the point in which I didn't take enough benefit from the experience of being in a cohort exchanging. It was great. Again, in the moment, I was not enjoying the pressure. I was thinking, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And the third time, why am I doing this? But now, after almost 4 years, well, 3 years, because I defended my Viva in February 18. So then I graduated officially in June, but my Viva was February. It's actually 4 years now that I went through the process. So I miss those days.
Can you say a bit more about what you meant? You think you graduated too fast in hindsight?
You know, and so let's go back into the celebratory note. I was the first EDBA of the EDBA program, of the EDBA one. It's pretty cool, right? To say
That you were, yes.
Yeah. And it's fine. It's worth it for me to celebrate that for once I was first at something, right? But I have to say, and that's great. You know, this is something that nobody can take away from me. But I felt that from the time I started the program in the fall 15 to the time I defended in February 18, it was like too soon. I wish I had seen more of my cohort eventually telling me about this is papers going through, this is what I've been doing. I got myself out of it sooner than what maybe I would have enjoyed too. That's what I meant. There is a whole experience about being sucked into the experience that is so important as well, because you're building a community of people that likely will share some journeys in common with you. And I see this now already. The network with the Ponts continues to exist, regardless that I graduated 4 years ago. And we are a testament to this. You are EDBA, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, and we're having a conversation, right?
Yeah. I think that's what's unique about this program is the opportunity to build camaraderie.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So just to kind of ground, I think the audience hopefully may be enjoying listening to your celebratory reminiscence, but is there any specific memory you could share? Memories that kind of right now makes you tingle to kind of ground this entire experience?
I think when, so actually the Viva, for the record, Ponts is the business school, but there is the mother school, which is this historical location in France. And I happened to go to the headquarters, let's call it this way, to the main school for my Viva. I did it from the office. So I had an office, I was prepped, they closed the door and I went through the Viva. It was remote, don't remember, maybe on Zoom. And I went through, I had my presentations, I had my conversation, and that's it. After, my work, there's some time for the commission, the jury to deliberate. And then of course they come back and they congratulate you, right, for having gone through the process. That was for me a moment where I felt that the experience was larger than just the value it had as a title. It was representing my choice, the friendship, the tutorship, the mentorship, the collaboration with people, the institution. It was one moment that meant much more than just the graduating from a program. It meant a whole experiential journey of 3 years. That was significant because it's also a lonely journey. So you do the classes, but then you have to write the papers. You're on your own. And so that made me feel again connecting to a community of people who was behind the program, my cohort, and sharing the news with a cohort, and feeling this genuine feeling of happiness for me was great. That is a moment where I think I really crystallizes many emotions in one.
Mm. To know that there are so many people in their own ways who have contributed and are vested in your success.
Absolutely. Oh,
Mm.
in every aspect of life, but in a degree program, it becomes even more visible
Yeah,
in many ways.
especially for a terminal degree.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Mm.
It does change you. I can tell if there's anyone that is will be watching this also in the recording part of our community. Yeah, it's a life-changing process.
Mm. Speaking about life-changing process, I wonder if there's any contribution from the fact that you are a master instructor black belt 4 done in Budo.
Mm-hmm.
Has that in any way influenced the way you approach this journey or the research topic that you chose? I mean, how much of that, because that's to get to that level requires a huge commitment
Yeah.
over many, many years. Has it in
No.
any way influenced it, your
Yeah,
ADD
Roslina.
journey?
I was bullied when I was a kid, right? Like it happens to many kids, and so for me, resorting to martial arts was a journey to build some form of confidence in me. It's not really the fact that you can defend yourself.
Mm.
It's more about what you start thinking about yourself via challenges. Fundamentally, that's what it is, and it comes with a lot of discipline. So I joined the Budo Institute when I was already black belt, but up to black belt first dan, I did judo, which is a common sport
Mm.
in many parts of the world. And I remember going through a process of, well, I was training 3 times a week. I had a Japanese sensei, and I remember going through the different belt ranks, as you know. That was changing me. First, there was a sense of respect about what the journey was all about. There is an environment in which authority matters, where seniority matters, where the rank you have matters, but there's also some form of ceremonial / rituals that happens inside of a dojo, right? So I felt that built me up a lot in terms of my self-centeredness, put it this way. I became black belt when I was 20, which I started 11. So it took me 9 years for the first black belt. And like in the doctoral journey, I remember the summer when I became black belt, you start feeling there is something that no one will ever take away from you. It's that feeling that you have achieved a journey of mastery within, a given discipline. And, martial arts are much more than what we sometimes see represented in media. It's just it's a personal journey, like many of the conversation we're having. Later on, I started to have a friend who was running a center in Montreal, and he said, "Why don't you go into more of a mixed martial arts, which is where Budo really started from?" And that's when I then started to go back in the dojo, and then I worked my way up to the fourth dan. When the fourth dan, I think it was in 2010, which is the same time I graduated from my PhD. So it was I was in my early 30s, so it was phenomenal for me to feel that at the age of my life, certain milestones have been accomplished. And you feel fundamentally rich, regardless of the financial. You feel that as a person, you have gone through a process of transformation that now gives you some common ground. Your academic journey, your spiritual journey, somehow, because the martial arts are connected to some form of internal spirituality. It settles you, and it grounds you a lot. And that also changed a lot my perception about who I want to be and how I want to be measuring my life, right? And that's also why I decided to become an academic, because I enjoy the pluralistic form of measurement rather than just by KPI and performance in a private company, which is a perfectly fine journey if it matches who you are. It was not matching who I am. Long answer, but it's there's no easy answer to a question like that.
But there are some intertwining threads in both experience.
They are.
Of which is the ability, surrounded by community and rituals, and a lot of the Eastern arts is very much about the approach towards mastery of something that nobody can take from you. Yeah,
it's still like this these days. I don't practice as much as I don't practice now for a few years, and I always say to myself I'll go back to it. But the fact of not having practice did not take that away from me. Right.
Yes. Yeah. So with that, if I may ask one last question before we go to the Q&A, and this is an opportunity to remind everybody, if you have Q&A questions, to put it in the chat or be prepared to kind of raise your hand and to speak. So from your heart, if you were on your deathbed, if this is the last three things you utter, what would you like for practitioners to take away from your research? What are three things that you think is really important for them to understand and to put into action?
So I think there is an earlier stage of who I was as a researcher and the contribution that I made back then. The first would be how working in topics of social relevance, it's a noble things to do, and people need to dedicate. Some people need to dedicate some of their life to this. You need to have a calling, as you call it before, Roslina, to make sure that the social improvement of our civilization is advocated for. And you do this somehow with research, in my case, because that was the gift that I was given, right, to do. I think that would be the first. The second, I think, a reflection, was my last, journey ahead of me as I'm thinking about my contribution, would be that nobody becomes anything by himself or herself. We are always the byproduct of many forces that are shaping us, and those forces are meant by many circumstances, but more importantly, many people who are defining who you become. So there is no day where I feel that my achievements, if we can simplify that, are the harvest of just my work. I just happen to be capable of maybe pushing it to a finishing line that can be concretized into something, but there's so many people who bring me there. So the power of communities, collaboration, participation, networks is critical. We are measured much more by our network than our individual contribution. And the final one is, which is what I'm really hoping with my next research project, is that I hope I will have helped redefining the architecture of our society as we're dealing with this unique period of our history right now. I'm hoping that at the end of my life, I can see that the effort that I'm putting now might have become something more than just the project that I was running at this time. So seeing the value of what I'm currently doing reflected over the next few years, this is what I would love to see. And I'm always hopeful that there is always a breakthrough in people's life. I believe from a research perspective, I'm going through, I would say, an alleged breakthrough in my own thinking with the project that I just finished and the new book. And I'm hoping that breakthrough will simply help me as I move in forward to build even more valuable contributions. That's what I'm hoping as, if I have to have the top three.
I'd like to just build on that a little bit. I know that was last question, so this is really the last question before Q&A. What would you like to see private companies doing. You could, for example, take it from a technology company, because I know AI is also
Yeah.
one of your big research topics.
Mhm.
Like, what would you like to see them doing, one thing that will make you think my research made an impact? Or government?
So, Roslina, we are, I think, facing a critical moment in our history because we are transitioning from a legacy of theories and constructs that were defined in the 20th century to something that hopefully will become the legacy for our 21st century. We haven't yet fully migrated there.
Mm,
I think that, and I'll use a language that we use in our work. We argue that we need a new generation of design activists to
mm,
take on the challenges we're having and design the world that we need to have. We're really talking about, there are two ways of looking at what kind of transformation you want to have, the architectural one or the modular one. We think that we need to have leaders that are helping us redesign the architecture
mm,
and leaders who are helping us design the more modular and component ones. And that's what we call design leader activism, right?
mm,
Or design activist leaders, actually. That's what I think. I'm hoping this is going to move forward, right? It's having this desire for activism in building the foundation of our new world. And I know that it sounds a little bit too much, because you can say it's a conversation that seems pompous, but it's also, I would say I am at the rate and stage of my life where I am closer to that vision because of, I think, the work done in the last 20 years than at any point in time in my life. So I have to aspire to something greater, and that's what I'm aspiring to.
mm. So with design activism, there necessarily needs to be a period of chaos. So look out, chaos.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I would like to now open up the floor for any questions from the audience. You can either type your questions into the chat or you can raise your hands. So while we wait for that, there is one burning question I have.
Mhm,
And this is actually has to do with AI.
mhm.
Because I listened to your talk on Google. If there was one thing that you think really needs to be changed in this decade, so we're 2022, before we see 2031,
Mhm.
that would significantly contribute to this world that you dream of, what would it be?
Thanks for this question. I'm actually happy you asked this.
Mm,
Um, Technologies have been largely defined as means to an efficient process. And we have learned this from the factories that if you're improving
mm,
the way you're producing, things are better somehow, right? And we continue to think largely of technology as a form of efficiency in the processes they're currently running. So we can use a chatbot to maybe make a customer service more effective, or an automated process to basically reduce waiting time, or whatever you want to call it. There's always a feeling that in the cost benefit analysis, efficiency is the name of the game. My
mm,
dream is to see artificial intelligence used to address challenges we face in a society. Climate can be better understood with climate modeling through AI. Some of the diseases that are degenerative, where people lose memories or where their brains simply start forgetting, can be impacted by technology that help them remember.
mm,
Robotics can help people who don't walk to walk, and technology connecting to software can give them access to activity from the brain that might help them recover some degree of mobility. We can 3D print retina, and through technologies like that, we can hope to give sight again to people who might have not seen before. Or we can
mm,
help people saving more and creating, parachute for rainy days by helping AI directly move envelopes of savings in our accounts, so that we are saving while we're living our life normally, because it's done automatically for us.
mm,
So if we could use the power of technology to augment humans,
mm.
it's within the vision of the architecture that I mentioned before.
Okay.
I strongly believe we are in the presence of the most powerful technological innovation we have ever had in history. And that means that we can really address many challenges we have from water, right? To rethinking carbon, to rethinking our cities, to infrastructure, to schooling, to education. If technology can help us improve the essence of life on Earth, if we are using technology to decrease and mitigate the impact of an incremental model in a finite system, without necessarily compromising standards of living or prosperity, I think that's what I would like AI to do. And AI can do many of these things because it can be programmed to address some of these challenges. So it's just about much more. And I'll finish on this, Roslina. Artificial intelligence is an extension of the brain, and it's the collective design we have that determine greatly what we do of it. So if we want AI to be augmenting humans, it will augment humans. It doesn't exist on its own. It's not an independent, entity that thinks autonomously. It's what we program it, is how we code it, is the information we define the algorithm for, and how we deploy them in real life. So I can use it to improve a process in a bank while I'm waiting to be attended, or I can help someone maybe having better access or better opportunities. So that's why I think the empowerment of the architecture and what we call design activism should be that we use technology as a collective design to improve life, not technology just as a independent actor to increase efficiency.
I know you said this is a last word, but I think it's important as we come out to the closing of our conversation to speak directly to some of the fears, which are very real, very palpable, and very loud surrounding the consumer side of AI understanding.
Yeah.
Could you speak to that fear?
I think they are legitimate. We have a society that is shifting to a data-driven society where our life is becoming codified every day. We have in way algorithms that are able to profile us based on our preferences, and we have in genetic studies that can profile us based on our genetic preferences. We, of course, are much more in the hands of an interpretation at the data level than just my free arbitrary, as I believe. So the fears are legitimate, and that's why I go back to the definition of who I am, right? As a researcher, what I'm currently trying to work on, which is like where my research has migrated with these days, is on the governance of technology. How do we govern technology so that we can really shape equitable systems where we can have a citizen feeling that their desire to be supported by technology will not violate their individual rights or their privacy or any degree of sensitivity they might have. So I think the fears are a red flag that we need to address this. We need to engage with the technology companies to understand that technology is not neutral, and trust is not just trust because you have a digital transform process. You have to build trust in the same ways you build in the physical world, you have to build in the digital one. And how do we build digital trust? How do we understand that data is today a predominant forms of information? How do we design governments, policies that help that process to happen without necessarily feeling that we're extracting too much value? Going back to the architectures, Lena, it's a fantastic time to rethink our processes because our systems were not designed in the presence or the advent of this level of technology evolution. So they are not wrong, they're just outdated to address some of the challenges we have. So it's time right now to take us to the next level of rethinking, and that goes in the same conversation we had before, related now to technology and fears. So I think it falls within the spectrum of what we discussed so far.
Well, I think one of my biggest takeaway as a practitioner is no matter what level you are in an organization or in government, as a decision maker, it befalls you to think much deeper as to where and how the future of value architecting needs to be in a way that is far more inclusive and every decision does matter.
It does.
So thank you so much, Mark, for taking the time to share your research, not just in the past, but also intimating what is to come in the future. And I hope that people are inspired to at least think, if not to take action.
Well, thanks, Roslina, for, I mean, this equally has to go to you, not only for reaching out, preparing this with month in advance to make sure that we could do the best we could, right, in preparing this moment together, and spending time with me and understanding more about who I am and what I do. And that was a precious, so like prep time that we have shared in getting this on a much more personal level than just an interview that could be done without knowing the person. The intelligence of the question you ask, because they really are meant to go deeper into the conversation, and the fact that you made me feel very comfortable. So I never felt that this was anything but a genuine, open conversation that was designed to, first of all, share, and hopefully, whoever, first of all, thanks for those who joined live, and for those that will watch this offline.
Take care, Mark. And thank you everyone for participating. And we'll catch you for the next season. Conversation. Bye.
Bye.